The waitress had been working at the small city cafe for a few years, and she knew the routine well. Each day, she arrived early, tied her apron, and moved with practiced precision. She took orders, served drinks, and smiled at customers who sometimes didn't even notice the effort she put into every gesture. She liked her job for the stability it gave her, though it rarely gave her the excitement she craved. Deep down, she carried a secret she rarely shared with anyone. A love for music, a talent that set her apart from the ordinary rhythm of her daily life. Since she was a little girl, she had loved the piano. She had spent countless hours at a second-hand keyboard in her small apartment, teaching herself songs by ear, memorizing melodies from the radio, and copying tunes from old sheet music she found in dusty corners of second-hand bookstores. Playing the piano was her escape, a way to pour out all the stress, sadness, and even joy that life offered. To her, music was a friend, a companion who never judged, who listened to every thought she had, and who rewarded her with beauty whenever her fingers met the keys. But outside her little apartment, she rarely played. The world of her cafe felt far removed from anything as grand as the music halls she had dreamed about. That particular morning, she moved through the cafe as usual, taking orders, balancing trays, and greeting customers with polite smiles. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, dust motes dancing lazily in the air, giving the room a quiet warmth. She had just finished serving a table when a new customer entered, a man who immediately caught everyone's attention. He wore a tailored suit that seemed far too expensive for this casual little cafe. His presence was magnetic, though in a way that was more imposing than welcoming. He scanned the room with sharp, observant eyes, his gaze eventually settling on her. Something about the way he looked at her made her uneasy, though she tried not to show it. He was older than most of the customers she was used to, confident, wealthy in a way that radiated from his posture, the clothes he wore, and the calm authority he carried with every step. She had served a lot of people over the years, but few made her feel as small as this man did. Still, she greeted him politely, offering the usual "Good morning, sir. How may I help you today?" "I hear you play piano," he said suddenly, his voice smooth but carrying an edge. She blinked, surprised. She hadn't said a word about her musical hobby. She hadn't posted anything online, hadn't told anyone at work, not even her closest friends. Yet here was a stranger, a man who seemed to know her secret before she even had a chance to speak. I do," she replied cautiously, unsure of where this conversation was heading. He smiled a little too knowingly. "Would you like to play at a party I'm hosting?" he asked, as if it were a casual question, though the weight of it felt anything but casual. "It's going to be quite the gathering. I think it would be entertaining to see what you can do." She felt a mix of surprise and hesitation. Party? Hosted by this man? She had never been invited to something like that, not by someone who clearly moved in a world far above her own. And yet, there was a coldness behind his words, an implication that it was less about admiration for her skill and more about testing her. I'm not sure," she stammered, trying to sound polite while hiding the nervous flutter in her stomach. "I don't usually perform outside of my apartment. I just play for myself." He leaned back in his chair, a small, almost amused smile on his face. "That's exactly why it will be interesting," he said, as if that alone justified the request. "I like to see what happens when people are put on the spot. Some rise to the occasion. Some falter." She forced a small laugh, trying to mask the unease twisting in her stomach. Something about the way he said it made it clear he wasn't really inviting her out of kindness. This was a game to him, and she wasn't sure yet whether she wanted to be a part of it. But at the same time, a tiny spark of curiosity flickered within her. What if she could actually rise to the occasion? What if, for the first time, someone outside her tiny apartment got to hear the music that had always lived inside her? I'll think about it," she said finally, keeping her voice calm. She wanted to leave the door open without committing herself to what felt like a trap. He nodded, satisfied, and left the cafe, leaving her with a lingering sense of both excitement and dread. The rest of the day passed in a blur. She moved through her tasks mechanically, her mind replaying the encounter over and over. She imagined the grand piano, the elegant room, the faces of strangers watching her. Her fingers twitched as if remembering the familiar keys, the melodies that had been a part of her life for so long. She tried to push the thoughts aside, reminding herself that she had no obligation to perform for anyone, especially someone who seemed to take pleasure in controlling and testing others. But the idea refused to leave her. She remembered how music had always given her strength, how it had comforted her during long nights and lonely mornings. She realized that performing, even in front of strangers, might not just be an opportunity. It could be a chance to prove to herself that her talent was real, that her passion mattered. A few days later, she received a formal invitation. It was delivered in an elegant envelope, far more luxurious than anything she was used to. Inside, there was a card with the details of the party, the location, and the time. It made her pulse quicken. This was real. The millionaire really wanted her to come. And now, the decision weighed heavily on her. She went home that evening, sat at her modest keyboard, and played a piece she had composed herself. Her fingers moved over the keys with practiced grace, each note carrying a mixture of anxiety and hope. She imagined the faces she would see at the party, the reactions she might get. Could she truly stand in front of a room full of strangers and let her music speak? Could she hold herself with confidence, even if she felt fear gnawing at her stomach? The more she played, the more she realized that the music itself seemed to answer these questions. It reminded her of every time she had sat alone, pouring her feelings into the piano. It reminded her that her talent was hers first, before it belonged to anyone else. She didn't have to perform for approval, for recognition, or even for survival. She played because she had always played and because she could. Still, the thought of the party lingered in the back of her mind. She knew the millionaire had likely planned for this to be a spectacle, something to entertain his friends at her expense. The idea that she might be embarrassed in front of so many influential people was terrifying. But she also knew that avoiding the challenge would mean staying in the same routine, never stepping outside the small bubble she had built around her life. By the time the evening arrived, she had made her decision. She would go. She would bring herself, her music, and her courage. She would face the unknown, even if it was intimidating, even if it was meant to humiliate her. And she would do so quietly, with the dignity she had cultivated over years of hard work and quiet perseverance. As she prepared for the party, she felt a mixture of emotions: fear, excitement, nervousness, and anticipation. She put on her best dress, simple but elegant, and looked in the mirror. She saw herself, not just the waitress who served coffee and sandwiches, but the musician who had spent years honing her craft in secret. That part of her, the part that loved music and had nurtured her talent through countless lonely hours, was ready to step into the light. She left her apartment and walked toward a new chapter she had never imagined. The streets were busy, the city alive with its usual noise and movement, but in her mind, she only heard the piano. She imagined the keys under her fingers, the music flowing through the air, and the moment when all her practice, her passion, and her courage would converge. She didn't know what would happen at the party, but she knew one thing. For the first time in her life, she was not performing for herself alone. She was stepping into a world that had been closed off to her, and she was ready to face it on her own terms. And so, with a deep breath and a quiet determination, she arrived at the grand house where the party was being held. She could hear the faint hum of voices, laughter, and music from the distance. Her heart raced, but she felt a steady calm underneath it. This was the moment that could change everything, and she was ready to meet it. The house where the party was being held was enormous, far beyond anything the waitress had ever imagined. Tall columns framed the grand entrance, and the large front doors were polished to a shine that reflected the bright lights outside. As she stepped onto the polished marble steps, she could hear laughter and music spilling into the night. The air smelled faintly of flowers and something expensive, a mix she wasn't used to but couldn't help noticing. She straightened her back, adjusted her dress, and took a deep breath. Inside, the house was even more overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting sparkling reflections across the marble floors. There were people everywhere, dressed in suits and evening gowns, holding glasses of champagne and talking in low, important voices. The kind of voices that carried authority, confidence, and a certain expectation of control. She felt small in comparison, a simple waitress standing at the edge of a world that felt entirely out of her reach. The millionaire was there, of course, his presence impossible to miss. He stood near the center of the room, surrounded by a group of wealthy and influential guests. He wore the same confident expression she had noticed at the cafe, though now it carried an extra layer of amusement. The kind of look that said he enjoyed being in control, that he liked knowing he could create moments that made others nervous or uncomfortable. Her arrival did not go unnoticed. Some guests glanced her way, their expressions curious or slightly amused. It was clear that, to them, she was part of the entertainment, a small detail in the larger spectacle of the evening. She could feel their eyes, and though it made her stomach twist with nerves, she kept her head high and moved forward. Every step she took was measured, careful, and deliberate. She had learned in life that first impressions mattered, especially in a world she had only glimpsed from afar. The millionaire's eyes met hers, and he gave her a small nod, as if to say, "You know why you are here." She nodded back, a mixture of fear and determination in her glance. This was the moment she had been building up to since receiving the invitation. She would not let him or anyone else see her falter. Not completely. The room was loud with chatter, glasses clinking, laughter, and the soft hum of music playing from somewhere in the background. But amidst the noise, she felt a strange clarity. She knew she had to find the piano. She had seen glimpses of it as she entered. A grand, polished instrument placed near a large window, gleaming under the chandelier light. She walked toward it, trying to keep her nerves hidden, though her fingers itched to touch the keys, to feel the familiar weight of the piano beneath her hands. As she approached, the millionaire stepped beside her. "Do your best," he said smoothly, almost a challenge. "I expect a show." His tone was casual, but the edge of it was unmistakable. She understood perfectly. He wanted her to be nervous, wanted her to make a mistake in front of all these people. She nodded once, keeping her expression calm, though inside, her heart was racing. She placed her fingers on the keys, feeling the cool surface under her fingertips. The room seemed to hush slightly, as if sensing the tension building. Guests had begun to notice her presence, and some murmured softly, wondering what she would do. They were expecting something small, maybe clumsy. After all, she was just a waitress in their eyes, someone whose world had nothing to do with theirs. For a moment, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She remembered all the hours she had spent practicing in her apartment, the music that had been her refuge, her joy, her pride. She remembered the melodies she had created from her own imagination, the pieces she had learned by ear, the songs she had perfected until every note felt alive beneath her fingers. She realized that all of that experience had brought her here, to this moment. And in that realization, a spark of confidence flickered. She opened her eyes and began to play. The first notes were soft, cautious, but they carried a clarity and precision that immediately drew attention. The room grew quieter as people began to notice, leaning slightly toward the music. There was a beauty in her playing that was undeniable, a skill that spoke not of training in elite conservatories, but of talent, passion, and countless hours of dedication. The millionaire's expression, which had been smug and anticipatory, began to shift. He raised an eyebrow, his lips tightening as he realized that what he had expected, an awkward, humiliating performance, was not happening. The music filled the room, each note more confident than the last, weaving a story that captured the attention of every guest. Murmurs of surprise and admiration spread through the crowd. "Where did she learn to play like that?" one guest whispered to another. "She's amazing," said another, her eyes wide in disbelief. The waitress continued, her fingers moving over the keys as if they were an extension of her own thoughts. The room seemed to fade around her. There was only the music, the notes she had practiced so long in private, and the way it now reached out to a room full of strangers. She was telling her story through the piano, revealing a part of herself that had always been hidden. The millionaire watched, silent, his amusement replaced by something else. Surprise, perhaps even a hint of respect, though he would not admit it aloud. His plan to embarrass her had completely failed. Instead, she had turned the situation on its head, commanding the attention and admiration of everyone present. As she reached the middle of the piece, she noticed that some of the guests had stopped their conversations entirely. They were standing near the piano, watching her play, some with their mouths slightly open in awe. She felt a surge of pride but remained humble, letting the music speak for itself. This was not about showing off, not about proving herself to the millionaire or anyone else. This was about the music, about the joy and release it gave her, and about sharing that with people who, until now, had never imagined she could possess such talent. The piece ended, and there was a moment of silence, almost as if the room collectively held its breath. Then came the applause, soft at first, then growing louder, more genuine, more heartfelt. Guests were smiling, some even standing to clap, their eyes filled with amazement. She felt a rush of emotion, a mix of relief, pride, and a little disbelief at the reaction. The millionaire stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He clapped slowly, deliberately, his eyes locked on her. There was a flicker of something, admiration, perhaps begrudging respect, but it was quickly replaced by the same controlled composure he always carried. "Well," he said, his voice measured. "That was impressive." There was no trace of the mocking tone he had used before. It was as if the music had disarmed him, leaving him to face the unexpected reality that the girl he had intended to embarrass had completely outshone his expectations. Other guests approached, complimenting her on her performance, asking questions about her background, her training, and her inspiration. She answered quietly, modestly, explaining that she had mostly taught herself, and that music had always been a personal passion. Their admiration was genuine, warm, and unfiltered. She realized that in this room full of wealth and power, she had found something she had never expected: respect and recognition for her talent. Despite the praise, she remained focused, calm, and grounded. She knew that the music was hers first and foremost, and that any acknowledgement from others was simply a bonus. But she also understood that this night could change things for her, open doors she had never imagined, and introduce her to opportunities that had previously seemed out of reach. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation, laughter, and music. She played a few more short pieces, each met with increasing enthusiasm from the guests. People began asking her to perform again, requesting encores, and sharing stories of their own experiences with music. The atmosphere around her shifted from curiosity to admiration, and even the millionaire seemed to recognize, if silently, that she had transformed the night into something remarkable. By the time she stepped away from the piano, her hands slightly sore but her spirit soaring, she realized that she had achieved something extraordinary. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and the weight of expectation, and she had risen above it, not through arrogance or defiance, but through skill, passion, and quiet determination. The millionaire, who had started the evening intending to amuse himself at her expense, was left to reconsider his assumptions. The party, meant to showcase his control and influence, had inadvertently highlighted her talent, humility, and courage. He had intended to create a moment of embarrassment, but instead, he had witnessed a story of triumph, one that no amount of money or social status could diminish. As she walked through the grand hall, the applause and praise still echoing in her mind, she realized that her life had shifted in a subtle but profound way. This was only the beginning. The recognition she had received that night would lead to connections, opportunities, and experiences that she had never imagined possible. But more importantly, she had proven to herself, above all else, that her talent was real, valuable, and worthy of being shared with the world. For the first time in a long while, she felt a deep sense of confidence, a quiet knowledge that no matter what challenges or skeptics lay ahead, she could face them with the same courage, skill, and grace that had carried her through the evening. The night had started with fear and uncertainty, but it ended with pride, admiration, and a sense of possibility that filled her heart and mind with hope for the future. The room was quiet now, though not in the tense, uneasy way it had been when she first approached the piano. This quiet carried something different. Attention, expectation, a weight that was both thrilling and terrifying. She stood before the grand instrument, her fingers hovering above the keys, and felt a strange mix of calm and nervous energy. She had played before, many times, but never with this many eyes on her. Never with so many strangers listening to the music that lived in her heart. She took a deep breath and let her fingers descend. The first notes were gentle, almost tentative, but they carried a richness that immediately drew the audience in. The melody she had chosen was one she had composed herself years ago, a piece that told a story of longing, hope, and quiet determination. As the notes floated across the room, the air seemed to shift. People stopped talking, glasses were set down, and all attention focused on the young woman and the music she created. The millionaire watched from the side, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. His expression had changed from smug amusement to something closer to astonishment, though he tried to hide it behind a mask of composed detachment. He had expected her to falter, to stumble, to give them something laughable that would entertain his guests. Instead, the performance was flawless, filled with emotion and technical skill that belied her modest background. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to feel the music fully. Each note was an extension of herself, a language she had spent years learning to speak without words. She could hear the subtle reactions of the audience, the soft intake of breath, the gentle shift of weight as they leaned closer, the quiet hum of appreciation. It was exhilarating, a reminder that what she loved most had power far beyond her small apartment or the routine of her cafe job. As the piece progressed, it grew in intensity. Her fingers danced across the keys, moving faster and more confidently, yet with control and precision that revealed her true skill. The audience was captivated, drawn into a world she had created through sound and emotion. She could see some guests whispering to each other, their expressions a mixture of surprise and admiration. Some were clearly impressed, leaning forward to catch every detail of her performance. Others simply watched silently, unable to speak, mesmerized by the beauty she produced. The millionaire's face was now an unreadable mask, though a flicker of emotion betrayed him. There was no mocking tone, no hint of amusement. He had come expecting entertainment at her expense and had instead witnessed a display of talent and poise that he could not have imagined. His guests, many of whom were accustomed to wealth, status, and influence as measures of worth, were now captivated by something far more genuine: skill, passion, and the courage to stand in front of a crowd and share a part of oneself without hesitation. She felt a surge of confidence as she moved into the climax of her piece. The notes were louder now, richer, more expressive. Her heart beat in rhythm with the music, and she felt a strange connection with the audience, as if the room itself had become part of the performance. Every glance, every reaction, seemed to respond to the music, confirming that she had not only held their attention but had earned their admiration. Her fingers flew over the keys, striking chords that resonated deep within the room. The melody rose and fell, soft then strong, delicate then bold, carrying a story of struggle and triumph, of quiet resilience transformed into beauty. The room was no longer just a space for socializing. It had become a stage for her expression, a place where her talent could shine without restraint. The millionaire, standing at the edge of the crowd, finally allowed a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was not praise, not exactly, but acknowledgement. He had been wrong to underestimate her, wrong to think she could be intimidated or embarrassed. Her performance had shifted the dynamic entirely. She was no longer the object of a cruel amusement. She was the center of attention, commanding respect with every note she played. The audience was completely silent as she reached the final notes of the piece. The last chord lingered in the air, a soft vibration that seemed to hang in the room for a moment longer than reality allowed. Then, slowly, as if waking from a dream, the crowd erupted into applause. It started quietly, some hesitant, some surprised at their own reactions, but it quickly grew into genuine, enthusiastic appreciation. Hands clapped, people cheered softly, some even whistled in delight. She opened her eyes and looked up, seeing the mixture of astonishment and admiration in their faces. She felt a rush of emotion, a combination of relief, pride, and joy that was almost overwhelming. She had faced her fear, embraced the challenge, and transformed what had been meant to embarrass her into a moment of triumph. The millionaire stepped forward, clapping slowly, deliberately. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, there was no hint of superiority in his gaze. Instead, there was a grudging respect, a recognition that she had not only met expectations but had exceeded them in a way that few could have imagined. "Well," he said, his tone measured but sincere, "that was impressive." Other guests began approaching her, offering compliments and congratulations. They asked how she had learned to play, where she had studied, and if she had performed publicly before. She answered modestly, explaining that she had taught herself and that music had always been a personal passion. Her humility only added to the admiration, as people were genuinely impressed by the combination of natural talent and dedication. Some of the guests even asked for short encores, requesting specific pieces or improvisations. She agreed, feeling a growing confidence with each subsequent performance. The applause, smiles, and genuine reactions reinforced the realization that her talent was real, valuable, and capable of touching others in ways she had never imagined. Meanwhile, the millionaire's guests exchanged glances, whispers of surprise and admiration spreading among them. They had witnessed something extraordinary. A person from a humble background, with no formal training, delivering a performance that captivated a room full of experienced, influential people. The contrast between her modesty and the grandeur of the setting made her talent even more striking. As the evening continued, she moved through a few more pieces, each one met with increasing enthusiasm. People were no longer seeing her as a simple waitress. They were recognizing her as a musician, someone who had honed her craft in private and now shared it with the world with courage and grace. Every note she played told a story, and the audience responded not just to the technical skill, but to the emotion and authenticity behind it. The millionaire, for his part, remained close by, observing quietly. He had intended to control the situation, to create a spectacle at her expense, but he could not deny the impact she had made. His plan had backfired, and yet there was something compelling in her ability to turn the tables. She had taken a challenge designed to humble her and transformed it into an opportunity to shine, and in doing so, she had earned the respect of everyone present, including him. By the time the final piece concluded, the room was filled with admiration, applause, and a sense of awe. The audience was no longer focused on wealth, status, or social hierarchy. They were focused on the music, on the talent, and on the courage it took to share such a gift with the world. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction and accomplishment, knowing that she had faced her fears and risen above them. The millionaire finally approached her, offering a hand. "You were remarkable," he said, his voice devoid of condescension. "I misjudged you. This was unexpected, and I respect it." She accepted the handshake, feeling a sense of closure. The man who had intended to embarrass her had been forced to acknowledge her skill and grace, and in that acknowledgement, she found a quiet triumph that no amount of applause or recognition could fully capture. Other guests continued to approach, complimenting her, asking about future performances, and expressing genuine interest in her talent. She answered each question politely, remaining humble yet confident, aware that this night had opened doors she had never imagined. Opportunities, connections, and recognition were now within reach, but she also understood that her true reward was the confirmation of her own abilities and the knowledge that she could face any challenge with courage and determination. As the party began to wind down, she stepped away from the piano, hands tired but spirits soaring. She realized that this night had been a turning point, a moment when fear had been transformed into triumph, when doubt had been replaced by confidence, and when a private passion had become a public gift. The applause, admiration, and respect she had received were gratifying. But the true impact was internal. She had proven to herself that her talent, dedication, and courage could overcome any obstacle, no matter how intimidating. The millionaire, watching her with a mixture of surprise and respect, seemed to understand that the lesson of the evening was not about control or amusement. It was about the power of talent, the value of courage, and the unexpected ways in which people can rise to challenges when given the opportunity. His plan to embarrass her had failed spectacularly, but in that failure, something meaningful had emerged. A recognition of skill, grace, and determination that could not be dismissed or ignored. She left the piano behind, her heart full, knowing that this night would be remembered not for the wealth or status on display but for the music, the courage, and the triumph that had filled the room. For her, the evening had been a revelation, a confirmation that her talent was real, her passion valid, and her potential limitless. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and expectation, and she had emerged not only unscathed but stronger, more confident, and ready for the opportunities that lay ahead. The applause and admiration still echoed in her mind as she moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations with humility and grace. She had transformed what could have been a humiliating experience into a defining moment, one that would shape her future and the way she saw herself. In a room full of wealth, power, and expectation, she had proven that talent, dedication, and courage could shine brighter than any status or social standing. The music had stopped, but the atmosphere in the room didn't settle. The applause still lingered, echoing softly against the high ceilings. People were still whispering in small groups, sharing astonishment at what they had just witnessed. The waitress stepped away from the piano, her hands slightly sore, but her chest was full of a strange, thrilling lightness. For the first time, she felt seen. Not as a waitress, not as someone ordinary, but as a person with real talent, capable of holding the attention of a room full of people who had never imagined her world. Guests approached her, some hesitant, some bold, but all with smiles and admiration. One older woman, with a gentle expression and silver hair, reached out to shake her hand. "You are extraordinary," she said softly. "I've heard many pianists, but there is something special about the way you play. It's alive." The compliment made her cheeks warm, and she smiled, her humility shining through. "Thank you," she replied. "I've always loved music, and I play mostly for myself, but I'm glad you enjoyed it." A few men, dressed in tailored suits and speaking with quiet authority, nodded in agreement. "You have a gift," one said. "Have you considered performing professionally? There is so much potential here." She shook her head gently. I've never had the chance. Life has been busy, and I've mostly played in private. Music has always been my escape." Their eyes lit up. "Well, I think tonight has changed that," another added. "People like us, those who understand the industry, see talent when it's right in front of us. You should consider what doors this could open." The millionaire lingered nearby, watching the interactions with a careful eye. His posture remained composed, but she could see that the smugness she had noticed earlier had vanished. His gaze held something different now, perhaps respect or surprise, as he observed the way she handled the attention. He had expected embarrassment, awkwardness, or at least discomfort, but she had remained poised, humble, and confident. Some guests had pulled out small devices to record brief clips of her performance, not to exploit her, but to remember the moment and share it with others in their social and professional circles. She noticed this and felt a mixture of apprehension and excitement. She hadn't imagined that her music could reach so far or touch so many people. A young man, who appeared to be a musician himself, approached with a smile. "That was incredible," he said. "I would love to collaborate sometime if you're interested. Your style is unique. It's emotional and precise at the same time." The waitress felt a lump in her throat. Collaboration, opportunities, these were things she had only dreamed of. I would love that," she said, her voice soft but steady. "It's been my dream to share music with others who understand it." Meanwhile, other guests began asking about her background, her story, and how she had learned to play. She shared bits of her life, careful not to seem boastful, explaining how she had taught herself and how music had always been a refuge. Each story, each word, seemed to deepen the respect and admiration in the room. People were no longer seeing her simply as a waitress who had been invited to a party. They were seeing her as a talented musician, someone whose dedication and passion had created a moment they would not forget. The millionaire finally stepped forward, his expression more open than before. "You handled that beautifully," he said. "I expected to see someone nervous, someone struggling under the pressure. But you turned it into something remarkable. I misjudged you." She nodded politely, unsure how to respond. She didn't need his approval, but there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that someone who had tried to intimidate her could no longer do so. "Thank you," she replied simply. "I just wanted to share the music." He nodded slowly. "And you did. I think, perhaps I can learn something from this. Talent is not always where you expect it to be." Other guests, noticing the change in his demeanor, whispered among themselves. Some exchanged amused glances. They had come expecting entertainment, perhaps even a little scandal, but instead, the night had turned into a celebration of talent, humility, and courage. The atmosphere shifted from casual socializing to genuine admiration and curiosity. Some people approached her to ask if she had any recordings or if she taught piano lessons. She explained that she hadn't shared her music publicly before, that it had always been private, and that teaching was not something she had considered seriously. But the guests encouraged her, offering contacts and suggestions for ways to explore her gift further. They spoke of music schools, professional opportunities, and local venues that appreciated unique talent. She felt overwhelmed but also thrilled. In the midst of the excitement, she noticed a young woman standing quietly nearby, a fellow attendee who seemed captivated by her performance but hesitant to speak. She walked over and smiled. "Hi," she said softly. "I just wanted to say, your playing was incredible. It made me feel something I can't quite explain. Thank you for sharing it." The waitress felt her chest tighten with emotion. "Thank you," she said gently. "That means a lot. I play because it makes me feel alive, and if it touches someone else, then it's even better." As the night wore on, the crowd around her continued to grow. People shared stories of musicians they admired, asked for advice, and expressed sincere wonder at how someone could rise from humble beginnings to deliver a performance that had captivated a room of seasoned, influential individuals. Each interaction reinforced a simple truth she had always known. Music was powerful, and her dedication to it had value far beyond what she had imagined. The millionaire, observing quietly, finally seemed to relax. The amusement he had sought at her expense had vanished completely, replaced by acknowledgement. He had planned to use her as a spectacle, a diversion, a source of entertainment for his friends, but instead, she had become the highlight of the evening. People were talking about her talent, sharing their impressions, and even he could not deny that she had transformed the energy in the room. By the end of the night, the waitress had made several connections that could change her life. Musicians, teachers, and professionals had expressed interest in her work, some even offering opportunities for performances and collaborations. She felt a mixture of disbelief and excitement, realizing that a single night had opened doors that had previously seemed impossible to reach. Despite all the attention, she remained grounded. She knew that talent alone was not enough. Dedication, humility, and perseverance were equally important. She had shown the world a part of herself, and in return, she had been met with genuine appreciation and encouragement. It was a rare and beautiful exchange, one that reminded her why she had pursued music in the first place. As the party wound down, she was invited to stay for a quiet moment in the grand hall, while the remaining guests chatted and enjoyed drinks. She sat at the piano once more, letting her fingers glide over the keys softly, not for performance, not for attention, but simply because she loved the music. The sound filled the room gently, a private echo of the triumph and joy she had experienced that night. The millionaire approached her one last time before the evening ended. His expression was composed, but there was a hint of genuine respect in his eyes. "I underestimated you," he said quietly. I will not make that mistake again. You have something rare, and it's clear to everyone who has seen you tonight. She nodded, accepting the acknowledgement without pride or arrogance. Thank you, she said. I just wanted to share the music. I didn't expect it to go this far. He gave a small, almost approving smile. Sometimes, the best moments happen when we least expect them. The night ended with warmth, admiration, and a sense of possibility that lingered long after the last guest had left. She walked home under the quiet city lights, reflecting on the events of the evening. She felt proud, but not boastful. Exhilarated, but not reckless. She knew that what had happened was more than just a performance. It was a turning point, a moment when courage, talent, and opportunity had converged in a way that could change her life forever. As she returned to her small apartment, she allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. She had faced fear, stood before an intimidating crowd, and shared the music that had always been her refuge. She had transformed a situation designed to embarrass her into a celebration of her talent. And in doing so, she had gained not only recognition but a sense of validation she had never experienced before. Her life had changed that night, not because of wealth, status, or power, but because of skill, passion, and courage. She had proven to herself, above all else, that she could rise to any challenge, and that her music, nurtured quietly for so long, could touch the hearts of others in ways she had never imagined. The days after the party were surreal for the waitress. She returned to her cafe job, carrying the same apron, taking the same orders, serving the same customers. On the surface, nothing had changed. The routine was familiar, the clatter of dishes and the smell of brewed coffee comforting in its predictability. But inside her, everything had shifted. The applause, the admiration, and the surprise she had seen on so many faces still echoed in her mind. She felt a quiet strength that she hadn't known she possessed, a confidence that came not from wealth or status, but from the knowledge that she had faced something terrifying and come through unscathed. Her coworkers noticed something different about her, though they didn't comment directly. She walked with a subtle but noticeable poise, her posture straighter, her voice calmer, her smile softer but more assured. She no longer carried the same nervous energy that had defined her life for years. Something inside her had changed. She had shared a part of herself that had always been hidden, and the world had responded with respect and admiration. That validation, however small, was transformative. Within days, she began receiving messages, calls, and emails from people who had attended the party. Some were musicians who wanted to collaborate, others were teachers offering mentorship, and a few were venue managers asking if she would consider performing publicly. Each message brought a rush of excitement, tempered by a quiet disbelief. These were opportunities she had never imagined, doors she hadn't even known existed. One email stood out. It was from a small, prestigious music school that had heard about her performance through word of mouth. They wanted her to audition for a scholarship, recognizing her talent even though she had no formal training. Her fingers trembled as she read the message, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. She had always loved music, but the thought of formal recognition and structured opportunities was overwhelming. Still, she knew she couldn't ignore it. This was the chance she had longed for, even if she hadn't dared to admit it to herself. That evening, she sat at her piano at home, reflecting on everything that had happened. She had never imagined that a single night could change so much. The party, the audience, the Millionaire's challenge. All of it had pushed her into a place of growth, courage, and visibility she had never known before. She realized that her life was no longer confined to the walls of her apartment or the routine of the cafe. Something larger, something exciting and full of possibility, had opened before her. The next weeks were a whirlwind. She prepared for auditions, practiced tirelessly, and began to explore the opportunities that had come her way. She was nervous, of course, nervous that she might fail, nervous that her talent might not be enough, nervous that she might stumble in a world that seemed so different from her own. But each time doubt crept in, she reminded herself of the night at the party, of the way her fingers had moved over the piano keys, of the audience that had listened with admiration and awe. That memory became her anchor, a reminder of what she was capable of when she trusted herself and embraced her talent. She auditioned for the music school and, despite her lack of formal training, impressed the judges with her skill, passion, and unique style. They recognized that her abilities were not just technical but expressive, a rare combination that could not be taught. She was offered a scholarship, one that would allow her to study formally, collaborate with other musicians, and perform publicly. For the first time, she realized that her dreams were within reach, that the possibilities she had once imagined only in her mind could now become reality. Meanwhile, her life at the cafe continued, but it felt different. Serving coffee and taking orders no longer defined her sense of self. It was a job, a comfort, a routine, but it was no longer the limit of her world. She moved through her days with a new purpose, knowing that each moment of practice, each performance, and each opportunity could lead her further along a path she had only begun to explore. She carried herself differently, with quiet confidence and a sense of self-worth that came from knowing her abilities were real and valued. The millionaire, who had initially tried to embarrass her, became a curious figure in her thoughts. She wondered if he realized the full impact of that night, how it had propelled her life forward instead of crushing her spirit. She didn't dwell on resentment or anger. Instead, she saw the experience as a lesson in resilience, in turning challenges into opportunities, in proving oneself without seeking approval. The encounter, though uncomfortable at first, had become a catalyst for change. As she began to perform publicly, she discovered something remarkable. Music had a power that extended beyond technical skill. It connected people, evoked emotion, and created shared experiences that transcended social status, wealth, or background. She saw it in the faces of audiences as they listened to her play. The wonder, the appreciation, the joy. She saw it in children inspired to pursue their own passions, in adults reminded of their own dreams. Her music became a bridge, connecting her private world to the larger one she had longed to enter. Performing also taught her humility. She realized that talent alone was not enough. Preparation, dedication, and the ability to connect with others were equally important. Each performance was an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to share not just skill but emotion. She embraced this responsibility with gratitude, knowing that her journey had begun with fear but had evolved into something far richer. A life filled with possibility, connection, and meaning. Her story began to spread. Local newspapers featured her as the self-taught pianist who amazed a room full of elite guests. Music blogs shared her performances, praising not only her technical skill but the heart she poured into every note. Invitations to perform in small venues, charity events, and music festivals arrived, each one a step into a wider world she had never imagined. She accepted them cautiously at first, but as her confidence grew, so did her willingness to embrace these new experiences. Despite the growing attention and recognition, she remained grounded. She remembered her days in the cafe, the small apartment where she had spent hours practicing, and the quiet moments of doubt that had once accompanied her love of music. Those experiences shaped her, reminding her of where she had come from and why her talent mattered, not for fame or money, but for the joy it brought to herself and others. She carried that humility with her, earning respect not only for her music but for her character. Opportunities continued to expand. She was invited to collaborate with other musicians, to record her compositions, and even to teach aspiring pianists who admired her journey. Each new experience reinforced the lesson she had learned the night of the party. Courage, passion, and authenticity could open doors that fear and doubt might have kept closed. She had stepped into a world that once seemed intimidating, and in doing so, had discovered a life filled with richness, connection, and fulfillment. Over time, the millionaire's presence in her story faded, but the lesson he unintentionally provided remained. His attempt to embarrass her had backfired, demonstrating that underestimation and arrogance could be overcome by talent, resilience, and confidence. She didn't dwell on the negative aspects of that night. Instead, she focused on the positive outcomes, the recognition, and the opportunities that had arisen because she had refused to be intimidated. she began to think of her life in a new way. The cafe remained a familiar and comforting place, but it was no longer the center of her identity. Music had become her path, her passion, and her purpose. Each day brought new experiences, challenges, and growth. She felt a sense of agency she had never known before, a knowledge that her choices, talent, and dedication could shape her future in ways she had only dreamed of. Her journey inspired others as well. Friends, family, and even casual acquaintances began to see her as a living example of perseverance, talent, and courage. She received messages from young musicians who had been encouraged by her story, from people who had been reminded of their own potential, and from those who admired the way she had transformed a difficult situation into triumph. She realized that her impact extended far beyond her own life, touching the lives of others in meaningful ways. In the quiet moments, when she sat at her piano alone, she reflected on how far she had come. The journey had begun with fear, uncertainty, and a challenge meant to embarrass her. It had evolved into a night of recognition, a series of opportunities, and a lifetime of growth. She had discovered that courage and talent could overcome obstacles, that humility and dedication could earn respect, and that sharing one's passion could transform not only oneself but also the world around them. Looking back, she realized that the party, the lavish house, the influential guests, and the Millionaire's challenge had been a turning point. It had forced her to confront fear, embrace vulnerability, and trust in her own abilities. It had shown her that the world could respond with admiration rather than judgment, and that opportunities often appear in unexpected ways. Most importantly, it had confirmed what she had always known deep down. Her music mattered, and she had the courage to share it. As she continued to perform, teach, and create, she carried the lessons of that night with her. She knew that life would continue to present challenges, that some people might doubt her, and that fear could still creep in. But she also knew that she had faced fear before, turned it into triumph, and discovered strength she hadn't realized she possessed. The experience had become a foundation for her growth, a reminder that talent, courage, and perseverance could open doors that once seemed impossible. And so, her life moved forward, richer, fuller, and more vibrant than ever before. She played music not only for herself but for audiences who appreciated the depth of her talent, for students eager to learn from her journey, and for the simple joy of sharing something beautiful with the world. She had stepped into a world that once seemed out of reach, and in doing so, she had discovered her own power, her own voice, and her own path. The story of the waitress who had been invited to play piano at a party to embarrass her became more than a tale of surprise. It became a story of courage, talent, and transformation. It became a testament to the idea that even in moments of fear and uncertainty, one could rise, shine, and change the course of their life forever. She had faced a challenge designed to test her, and she had emerged stronger, confident, and ready to embrace a future full of promise, beauty, and music.